We recorded some music videos in an empty building that my church just purchased. We've never done anything like this before, even in our own building, and so there were a lot of lessons learned, but honestly, I think it turned out really well overall. And I just want to show you guys the different things that we did, the things I would do differently next time, and how we kind of went about the process. And because this is Budget Church live streaming, we didn't spend an arm and a leg to make this happen. We didn't rent or buy any new gear for this. It was just some of the video stuff that we had or I owned, and then, the normal stuff from our church just moved over into this empty building. So you really don't need to spend an arm and a leg to make something like this happen for your church if it's something you're interested in. You just have to make sure that you plan right and that you're ready for the different things that may come up. So let's take a look at what we did. First of all, why were we doing this? So we just bought this building, which is going to be an extension of our main building on 23rd Street in Oklahoma City. We're running out of space and we need more kids space and other such things for our church. We'll still be meeting in the theater next door, but this is going to be some much needed space to help us expand and be able to reach the city for Christ more easily. But right now it's completely empty and we've just kind of started the giving campaign in order to raise money for all the renovations we need to do. And we thought it'd be kind of cool to film something in here, get some good recordings of some of our original songs that we've written, and also just be an encouraging time during this new season for our church. So Emily, our social media director, also one of our worship leaders, kind of started organizing the whole thing, getting a few different people from our worship team who would be down to participate and figuring out what songs we were going to record while we were there. I was handling everything about the video and the setup of the tech, and my buddy Caleb was going to be actually mixing and mastering after we were done with these songs. We kept things pretty simple. We were running a guitar, a keyboard, and then just 3 vocals across the board. We wanted to make sure things were pretty light. We didn't want to make this overly complicated since it was the first time we've kind of done a live recording like this. And honestly, the fewer people we needed to get involved, the better, since we weren't really sure how this was going to go. We got our band placed in the room where we wanted it, and then it was time to actually run all the cables and do all of that. Obviously, when you're doing any kind of live recording, the big part is, how do you record things? Well, we have a Behringer XR18 that we take to our student camp, and that has a USB out that you can use as an interface into a computer. So we ran all of our inputs into the XR18 and then ran that USB into a separate computer where we could actually record all of the different channels in Ableton. We also ran a click from Ableton back into the XR18 into the in-ears for the different musicians. To keep things simple, we just used wired in-ear packs, but you could use whatever you need to there. We didn't want to set up an actual PA in this room since that would have just been really involved and there was no one there to actually listen to it. So we needed to make sure that everyone actually had in-ears so that they could, perform and actually hear everything that was going on. It made for kind of a funny experience in the room without an in-ear pack because all you heard was the guitar and someone plunking down on some keyboards, as well as the singing, which sounded really cool in the really reverby empty space, but we weren't going to be recording like that anyway. We were going to be doing all that in post, so it didn't really matter that much. I think the XR18 was great for something like this because it's super small to carry, very easy to just track into a computer, but it's pretty limited on channels, so that's another reason why we couldn't do a much bigger band than this. We definitely had a few open channels, so we could have added some more guitars or a bass or something like that, but again, we wanted to keep it really simple just for this first time, but maybe we'll do more in the future. Now, as far as video is concerned, we knew that lighting was going to be kind of an interesting piece of this. The front of this building is just a huge open window open to the street, but with some plastic tarps over it. So the light coming in was pretty diffused and soft, but we were going to be shooting this in the evening. 1, because that's when people are off of work. 2, so the light wasn't as harsh. And 3, so the street noise was going to be quieter. It gets a little bit loud during the day, and we didn't really want to be fighting that while we were recording all of this. But that also meant it was a little bit darker in the building, and the light was going to be changing quite a bit over the course of us recording 3 different songs. We did each recording for each song a couple of takes in a row, so we weren't really that worried about in an individual song the light changing all that much, but from the start of the first song to the end of the last one, there was a pretty drastic shift. So as far as editing and post, we have to make sure we edit in such a way that we can keep things looking fairly consistent. It doesn't need to look exact. No one really cares that much when these were filmed, so as long as we're releasing them at different times, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but that is something to keep in mind if you're going to be recording over a long period of time and it's not a super light control area. We did bring a couple of my own studio lights out there, as well as a couple softbox modifiers. Now, these are not big enough to really light the space correctly, and sure, the light could have been softer or more balanced across the stage, but overall they did a decent enough job and were very easy to set up and tear down, as well as being things that I already have. Camera-wise, we were also using cameras that I own, the Canon R8, which is what I'm shooting this video on, as well as the Canon C70, which is a bigger, more professional cinema camera. but you really don't need something like this to film on. If you have cameras that you use for your live stream, you can potentially repurpose them for this. I think it still would have looked great if we used those. Honestly, it's just easier to use my own stuff because I know what it is and I know where it's set up. Most of the time when I'm shooting stuff, honestly, I just shoot in H.264 because I don't really care that much about color grading for the stuff that I'm doing. But because I knew that the lighting would be really challenging in this space, and because I wanted to make sure that the two cameras matched really, really well, I did decide to shoot these in C-Log so that I would have full color grading freedom when it came time to edit these in post. I have a little bit of experience doing that, but that was a little bit of a learning curve for me on this particular shoot. That's something to keep in mind if you're filming something, especially if it's outside, to make sure that you have enough dynamic range and you're able to match your cameras really well. When it came time to actually record, we basically did 3 run-throughs. The first one was just kind of a practice for the band and setting levels to make sure that everything was okay for that given grouping. Then we did 2 real takes to make sure that we had 2 actual good recordings that we could mix and match and splice together for the audio and the video. This is where having a click track really, really comes in handy, because if we didn't have that and didn't make sure that everyone was at the exact same tempo, running the exact same song structure, you wouldn't really be able to mix and match those takes super well. But because we knew that everything was consistent from take 1 to take 2, we're able to do that. So make sure, even if you're not a band that normally uses click at your church, you probably want to use it for something like this, just to make sure that everything matches up perfectly. For the first take, I just had my Canon R8 sitting on a tripod with a nice wide shot of our stage, just to make sure that I would always have something to dump to. And then I ran handheld with my Canon C70 with a 7200 lens to make sure that I could get those tight details while staying mostly out of any kind of wide camera shot. For the second take, I again ran my C70 in my hands, but I took the R8 off of the tripod and gave it to one of our other musicians who wasn't playing in that particular set. We always had somebody kind of sitting on the bench, and so I figured, oh, this would be a great time to just kind of get some extra handheld medium shots that we could mix and match in. And that was great, but there was a small problem with that, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. Honestly, this went really, really well. We didn't really face any huge struggles in the moment. Everyone played and sang their parts really well. We have a super talented worship team, and we were able to capture the audio that we needed and capture the video that we needed so that we could edit them together in post. All in all, I mean, I think we were there for like 4 hours or something to record 3 songs from the time we set up to the time we actually left. And I mean, to me, that's really not bad at all, considering everything that was actually going into it. So the big part then is the actual post-edit workflow. I was in charge of editing the video together, which I really enjoy, but I've never actually edited together a music video, so it was going to be a little bit interesting. Like I said, Caleb was actually going to mix and master the audio into something that sounded fantastic, and maybe I'll do a follow-up video with him talking about that. As far as I'm concerned, I told him, hey, send me something when you're done and I will drop it into our video, and that's basically what happened. I mean, he was never really done. It was V2, V3, V4, V5, but it sounded amazing, and shout out to him. Again, maybe I'll have to do another video where we kind of talk to him and see what his process was for that. But from the video side of things, I used DaVinci Resolve to edit, so I dumped all of my video files into there and set them up as a multicam clip. So what this does is it takes all of my different clips, even from the 2 different takes, and lines them up based on the waveform, which did a decent job, but wasn't perfect because the audio was just scratch audio from the room. This would be easier if things were time-coded or something like that, but it was pretty easy to make those adjustments and get them where they needed to be. But essentially, then it combines them all into a single multi-view, and then you can play through that clip and cut the cameras live, just like you would in like a live church service or something. Then, after you've run through the whole song and you've kind of cut those live, you can go through and you can make tweaks in order to make sure that those cuts come at the right time. You don't cut to something you didn't really want to based on what the camera actually ended up looking like, etc., etc. So it's kind of the best of both worlds of using that live workflow, but then also being able to go back and edit it and make sure it looks good. And this is when I realized the critical mistake that I had made when we recorded. And that is, having a wide shot is great, but people don't really sing or play consistently between 2 different takes. So because I only had the wide shot in our first take, that meant that anytime I had to dump to it because my other cameras were moving or not getting something I needed, I better hope that the audio recording was from the first take. Otherwise, I might have situations where somebody was really singing out crazy loud, or maybe was doing kind of an ad-lib part, but it wasn't on camera. And that really created some problems sometimes, where I had to really pick and choose what cameras I was jumping to, or even we had to go back and change parts of the audio the way that it was mixed to make sure that that ad-lib portion wasn't in there. So if we were to do this again, I would make sure that I had a wide shot on any take that we did, just to make sure that no matter what happened, I always had a shot that I could dump to, regardless of what was going on. It also revealed another problem, which was a lot of times in this multi-cam shot, my camera was doing the same thing in both takes. And that's great. But if I'm trying to cut cameras and I have 4 cameras now, it's not super helpful if 2 of my cameras are pointing at the same thing. I should have done a better job beforehand of mapping out the shots I was trying to get at different times to make sure that I could vary them between the takes. Again, you got to make sure that you're getting some consistency in case, again, the ad-lib parts happen. You want to make sure you capture that. But I also want to make sure that I have variety in my shots and they're not all the same between the 2 different takes, because that means I'm basically limiting myself to 2 cameras now instead of 4. And finally, turns out having somebody who doesn't know how to run a camera is fine, but don't expect it to be 100% usable. There were a lot of times where maybe they would cut the shot a little too early, or the framing wasn't really quite right, or they weren't really noticing, oh, I was in the background of that shot. None of which is really that big of a deal and I can work with, but having somebody who's actually experienced in operating the camera would have been a lot better. Now, for this being our first time, I'm so happy with how that turned out. But if we were to do this again, I would definitely get some volunteers from our live stream team to actually come and man the cameras. Especially since they're used to doing it in a worship setting, they have an idea of the kind of stuff we're looking for. Finally, I think it would have been really nice if I, as the camera operator, also had a wireless in-ear system as this was running, so that I had a better idea of what the band was actually doing. There were a lot of parts where, yeah, I could hear the acoustic guitar playing, so I knew that was going, but I couldn't really hear what the keys were doing in the background, and so it was kind of difficult to make sure I was getting a shot of the most important thing. It would have been pretty trivial to give me a wireless pack and some in-ears, and so I think if we did this again without a PA, I would definitely make sure to do that. Once I got the edit looking how I wanted and did a little bit of color grading on it, which I'm not going to go into detail here because honestly I'm not a super talented color grader, but I think it looks okay. I got the audio files from Caleb, dropped it in and hit export, and here we go. We've got a finished music video that honestly I think turned out really well. It was a lot of fun. It was a huge learning experience, and I think it's going to be something awesome for our team and for our church to be able to look back on and see the awesome worship and prayers that went into this space before we actually moved into it. If you guys want to check out the full video and how it turned out, I'm going to link it down in the description. We've only done 1 of the 3 so far, but the other 2 will be coming soon, so maybe by the time you watch this, they'll all be there. But go ahead and check it out. Let me know what you think of it. I think it worked pretty well, and it was a pretty easy, low budget, low effort way of making this happen. I think with the amount of effort and amount of budget that we put into this, I am overwhelmed with how well it turned out. We have a ton of super talented people at my church who are willing to go above and beyond to make something like this happen, and I'm super excited and stoked about the result of these videos and how they turned out. And hopefully this gives you the confidence to do something like this at your church. Obviously it'll be easier if it's in a space that's already wired up and ready to actually take those audio signals and record, but if this shows you anything, it should be, hey, yeah, you can record a music video in a place that has a single working outlet and that you had to chain 4 different extension cords together just to get power to all your different places, and not that many people, way less people than you really should have. You know, I think if you're willing to put a little bit of time and effort and forethought into things, you can make a lot of things happen with not a lot of gear, which honestly is kind of the whole point of this whole channel, if we're being honest. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I hope you guys enjoy it. Go check out that video. Until next time.